Faith is not about understanding every detail or mapping out every possibility. It's about stepping into the unknown with confidence that God has already paved the way. When you try to calculate everything, you limit yourself to human reasoning, but faith calls you higher. Faith says, I don't need all the answers to move because I trust the one who holds them. When you leap, you activate something divine that can only be unlocked through trust. There is a difference between being cautious and being paralyzed by doubt. Some of us are waiting for conditions to be perfect, for all the facts to align before we make a move. But let me tell you, if you're waiting for certainty, you'll never move at all. Faith doesn't need certainty. Faith only needs obedience. That leap you're afraid to take could be the very step that changes everything. You see, God is not limited by what you see or what you know. His ways are higher than your ways, and his thoughts are higher than your thoughts. When you trust beyond your own understanding, you invite his unlimited power to show up in your life. Stop trying to measure an infinite God with a finite mind. Stop trying to reduce his plan to a formula you can control. Faith is bold. Faith is courageous. It defies logic and moves in the direction of promise, not proof. You don't need proof when you've got a word from God. It doesn't matter if it looks impossible. It doesn't matter if people say it's unrealistic. When you leap in faith, you're not depending on your own strength, you're depending on his. Think about the moments in your life when you hesitated because you didn't have all the answers. How many opportunities did you miss because you were waiting for certainty? But let me tell you something, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. When you take the leap, you'll find that what you need is already waiting for you. Faith requires trust, and trust requires surrender. You can't leap if you're still holding on to your comfort zone. Some of us have been standing at the edge for far too long, clinging to what's safe and familiar. But God is calling you out of your comfort, out of your calculations into something greater. Let go of the shore and step into the deep waters of faith. Faith is not about perfection, it's about progress. You don't have to get it all right to move forward. The enemy will try to convince you that you're not ready, that you don't know enough, that you're not good enough. But faith silences the lies of the enemy and says, I may not know everything, but I know God is with me. The beauty of faith is that it connects you to something bigger than yourself. You may not see the whole staircase, but faith says, take the first step. The leap is not about where you land, it's about trusting the one who will catch you. Even if you stumble, even if you fall, God's grace will be there to lift you up and set you on the path he has prepared. Let this be the season where you stop calculating and start leaping. Stop waiting for every detail to make sense. Stop allowing fear to talk you out of your destiny. God has already worked it out. The provision is already there. The doors are already open. All he's waiting for is your step of faith. Obedience without clarity is one of the greatest tests of faith. It's when God says go but doesn't tell you where you're going. It's when he calls you to step forward but doesn't explain why. Abraham didn't wait for every detail to be revealed. He didn't demand a blueprint. He simply trusted the voice of God and moved forward. That's the kind of obedience that unlocks promises and changes destinies. Some of us are waiting for a map before we move, but God isn't in the business of handing out GPS coordinates for your calling. He's looking for a heart that will trust him even in the silence. There will be moments when you don't understand the full picture, but obedience means saying, yes, Lord, even when the way ahead is unclear. Faith is not about knowing the destination, it's about trusting the guide. The truth is, obedience without clarity often feels uncomfortable. It's not logical. It doesn't always make sense. People might question your decisions and doubt may try to creep into your mind. But obedience is not about pleasing people or satisfying your logic. It's about aligning yourself with the will of God. When you obey, even in uncertainty, you align yourself with heaven's agenda. Think about Abraham leaving everything familiar, stepping into the unknown with nothing but a promise. That kind of obedience requires surrender. You can't cling to the old while reaching for the new. Sometimes God will call you to let go of what's in your hand so he can place something greater in its place. But you'll never receive it if you're unwilling to trust him in the process. Obedience is the key that unlocks the blessings you've been praying for. It's not about understanding the why behind the call, it's about trusting the one who made the call. When you say yes, you're not just moving in faith, you're moving in purpose. God is not asking for perfection, he's asking for your trust. He's asking for your willingness to move before you see the full plan. Sometimes God will only give you enough light for the next step. He's not trying to frustrate you, he's trying to grow your faith. If you could see the entire path, you wouldn't need to trust him. But it's in the moments of uncertainty when you obey without knowing that your faith matures. It's in those moments that God reveals himself in ways you've never experienced before. The call may be uncomfortable, but it's always worth it. Abraham walked into his promise not because he understood it, but because he obeyed. Imagine the blessings waiting on the other side of your obedience. Imagine the breakthroughs, the open doors, the favor that's tied to your willingness to move. Sometimes the greatest blessings are hidden in the places you're afraid to step into. Delayed obedience is disobedience. Some of us are waiting for clarity, but God is waiting for obedience. Stop hesitating. Stop overthinking. Stop letting fear hold you back. If God has called you, he's already prepared the way. All he needs is your yes. When you obey, even when it doesn't make sense, you position yourself for supernatural provision. Let this be the season where you step out in bold obedience. Let this be the time where you stop waiting for clarity and start trusting the God who sees the end from the beginning. Your obedience has the power to change everything. It's not about what you understand, it's about who you trust. Vision can only take you so far because it's confined by what you can perceive in the moment. Your eyes show you the obstacles, the limitations, the challenges, but trust takes you beyond what you see. Trust opens the door to the unseen, where God is already working things out in your favor. What you see is temporary, but God's plans are eternal, and his blessings are beyond anything you could ever imagine. It's easy to get caught up in what's in front of you, the bills, the problems, the struggles, but if you're only looking at what's visible, you're missing the bigger picture. God is doing things behind the scenes that you can't comprehend. Trust isn't about seeing, it's about believing that he's already moving, even when nothing seems to change. Your limited vision will always try to make you doubt. It will tell you that the mountain is too high, that the storm is too strong, that the dream is too far. But trust silences the voice of doubt and says, I may not see it yet, but I know my God is able. Trust lifts your eyes off the problem and fixes them on the promise. I think about Peter stepping out of the boat. As long as he focused on Jesus, he walked on water. But the moment he looked at the wind, the waves, he started to sink. That's what happens when you rely on your vision instead of your trust. The storms in your life may be real, but so is the God who commands the wind and waves to be still. Trust doesn't deny the reality of your situation. It acknowledges the greater reality of who God is. What you see may look impossible, but trust declares with God, all things are possible. You don't have to understand how it will happen. You just have to believe that it will. God specializes in making a way where there seems to be no way. When you limit yourself to what you see, you're putting a ceiling on what God wants to do in your life. But trust tears down that ceiling and says, God, I believe you for more. Trust is not about what's in your hand. It's about what's in his. He holds the universe, and yet he's mindful of every detail of your life. The enemy will try to use what you see to discourage you. He'll magnify the problems, highlight the delays, and amplify the fear. But trust reminds you that what you see is only part of the story. God's timeline is not your timeline, and his ways are not your ways. Trust says, even if I can't see it now, I know it's already done in the spirit. Trust allows you to walk boldly into the unknown because you're not walking alone. God is with you every step of the way, guiding you, strengthening you, and making the crooked path straight. Trust gives you the courage to move forward. Your vision says stop. It's the bridge between where you are and where God is taking you. Let this be the moment where you stop relying on what you see and start trusting in what you believe. Your vision is limited, but God's power is unlimited. Don't let temporary circumstances make you doubt eternal promises. Trust him. And watch how he takes you beyond what you can see into blessings you never imagined possible. God's plans for your life are so much bigger than what you can imagine. You're sitting here trying to figure it all out, but God is already 10 steps ahead, working behind the scenes in ways you can't even see. He's not limited by your thoughts, your resources, or your circumstances. While you're thinking small, God is thinking exceedingly, abundantly above all you could ever ask or think. Sometimes you box yourself in because you're trying to make sense of the journey. You want all the answers before you move, all the pieces in place before you trust. But let me remind you, God doesn't operate on your understanding. He doesn't need your permission to bless you in ways that don't make sense. All he's asking for is your trust. Stop trying to shrink God's plans to fit your imagination. You can't comprehend the fullness of what he's doing because his ways are higher than your ways, and his thoughts are higher than your thoughts. You're thinking addition, but God is thinking multiplication. You're hoping for a blessing, but God is preparing an overflow. The beauty of trusting God is that you don't have to know how it will happen to believe that it will. Faith is not about having all the answers, it's about trusting the one who does. You're worried about what's next, but God has already written the final chapter. And let me tell you, it ends in victory. Sometimes the reason you feel stuck is because you're holding on to your own plans so tightly that you're not open to God's, but his plans are always better than yours. You're asking for a door to open, and God is preparing a whole building for you to walk into. You're asking for a blessing, but he's positioning you to be a blessing to others. Trusting God means releasing control. It means surrendering your need to understand and letting him lead. You don't need to see the whole picture to move forward. God is the artist, and he's painting something beautiful with your life. Every stroke, every detail is working together for your good, even when it doesn't make sense right now. Think about Joseph in the Bible. His journey didn't make sense, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. But every step, every trial was part of God's greater plan to elevate him to a position he couldn't have dreamed of. What looked like setbacks were really setups for his destiny. God's plans don't always look like what you expect, but they're always exactly what you need. You're praying for a solution, but God is building your character. You're asking for a breakthrough, but he's preparing you to sustain it. His plans are not just about where he's taking you, they're about who he's shaping you to become along the way. So stop limiting yourself to what you can see or understand. Let go of the fear, the doubt, and the need for control. Trust that what God has for you is bigger, greater, and more powerful than anything you could imagine. You may not have all the answers, but you have him, and that's all you need. God's plans are exceeding your imagination even now. Trust him and watch what he will do. Fear and trust cannot occupy the same space. Fear whispers that you need guarantees before you move, that you need to see the end before you take the first step. But trust says, I don't need to know how it will work out. I just need to know who is in control. Trust is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward despite it. When you let go of fear, you create room for God to step in and show his power. Fear will keep you stuck in what's familiar, even when God is calling you into greater. Fear tries to convince you that the unknown is dangerous, but trust reminds you that the unknown is where God does his best work. He is not asking you to figure it all out. He's asking you to trust that he already has. Letting go isn't losing control. It's surrendering control to the one who holds the universe in his hands. The truth is, fear demands guarantees because it thrives on doubt. It tells you to calculate every risk, to analyze every scenario, to prepare for the worst. But trust doesn't need guarantees. It thrives in surrender. Trust says, even if I don't understand, I will obey. Even if I don't see the whole picture, I will follow. Trust shifts your focus from the problem to the promise, from your strength to God's sufficiency. Think about Peter on the boat. When Jesus called him to walk on water, Peter didn't ask for guarantees. He didn't say, Lord, show me the science behind this. He stepped out in trust, and as long as his eyes were on Jesus, he did the impossible. But the moment he looked at the wind and the waves, fear crept in and he began to sink. That's what fear does. It distracts you from God's power and magnifies the storm. Fear is loud, but trust is louder when you choose to listen. Fear will shout every reason why you can't succeed, every reason why you're not enough, every reason why you should stay where you are. But trust whispers, God is with you. He will not fail you. He has already gone before you. When you silence the voice of fear, you amplify the voice of trust, and that's where miracles happen. Let me tell you something, fear is not from God. Scripture says God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. Fear will paralyze you, but trust will propel you. Fear will shrink your vision, but trust will expand it. Fear sees obstacles, but trust sees opportunities. You get to choose which one will guide your steps. Trust isn't passive, it's active. It's not just sitting back and hoping for the best, it's stepping forward, even when the ground feels shaky. Trust is saying, God, I don't know how this will work out, but I know you do. I don't have all the answers, but I trust you to lead me. When you choose trust over fear, you unleash heaven's power in your life. The battle between fear and trust is a daily one. There will always be reasons to fear, but there are even greater reasons to trust. The same God who parted the Red Sea, who shut the mouths of lions, who brought dead dreams back to life, that same God is with you. Fear may tell you to stay in the boat, but trust tells you to step out onto the water. Let this be the moment where you let go of fear and grab hold of trust. You don't need guarantees when you have God. You don't need to see the whole plan when you trust the one who made it. Surrender your fear and watch how God steps in to do what only He can do. When trust takes the lead, fear loses its power, and you step into the fullness of God's purpose for your life. Testing always comes before trusting, because God uses trials to refine your faith. Before you can walk fully in His purpose, He allows situations to challenge your reliance on Him. It's not to break you, but to build you. Testing reveals what you're holding on to, whether it's your own strength, your resources, or the security of your circumstances. God uses the test to shift your dependence from yourself to Him. Think about the Israelites at the Red Sea. Faced with an impossible situation, they had a choice: trust God to make a way, or panic and fear. The sea wasn't just a barrier, it was a test. God didn't bring them there to leave them stranded. He brought them there to show them His power. And when they trusted, the waters parted, and they walked through on dry ground. Testing is uncomfortable because it stretches your faith. It pushes you beyond what you can control and forces you to rely on God. But let me tell you, the test is not the end, it's preparation for what's coming next. God is using the test to strengthen you, to deepen your trust, and to position you for greater blessings. What feels like a setback is often a setup for a breakthrough. Sometimes the test looks like silence. You're praying, but it feels like God isn't answering. You're waiting, but nothing seems to be happening. But even in the silence, God is working. The teacher is always quiet during the test because He's already given you what you need to pass. Trust isn't about feeling God's presence in the moment. It's about knowing He's there, even when you can't see Him. Your test will often target the very area where God wants to grow your faith. If it's your finances, He might ask you to give when you feel like you don't have enough. If it's your future, He might call you to step out without knowing where you're going. The test is designed to stretch you, but it's also designed to reveal God's faithfulness. When you pass the test, you'll see His provision in ways you never imagined. Look at Abraham, who faced the ultimate test when God asked him to sacrifice his son Isaac. It didn't make sense, but Abraham obeyed because he trusted the one who made the promise. And just when it seemed like all was lost, God provided a ram in the thicket. The test wasn't about losing Isaac, it was about proving Abraham's trust. Sometimes God will test you to see if you trust the gift more than the giver. Testing often feels like pressure, but pressure is what produces diamonds. God isn't testing you to harm you. He's testing you to strengthen you. He's refining your faith, removing the impurities of doubt and fear, and preparing you to shine for His glory. The test may be hard, but the outcome is worth it. When you trust Him in the fire, you'll come out refined and ready for what He has in store. The tests of life are not random, they are intentional. God uses them to position you for greater impact. He's testing your character, your endurance, your willingness to trust Him above all else. Each test is a stepping stone to the next level of faith. If you can trust Him with the little, He'll entrust you with the much. Don't despise the test. It's a sign that God is preparing you for something greater. Let this be a reminder that every test has a purpose. God doesn't waste anything, not your tears, not your struggles, not your waiting. The test is temporary, but the trust it produces is eternal. When you embrace the test, you open the door for God to reveal His power, His provision, and His plan. Trust Him in the test and watch how He turns it into a testimony. Faith has a way of taking the questions that keep you up at night and turning them into stories of God's glory. You may not understand the how or the why, but faith reminds you that you don't have to. You only need to know who. The God who spoke the universe into existence, the God who has been faithful in every season of your life, that's who is working in you, and He will finish what He started. Questions will always arise when you step out in faith. How will I make it through this? Why is this happening to me? But faith doesn't require answers, it requires trust. Faith takes those questions and places them in God's hands, believing that He has a plan even when you can't see it. He's not asking you to figure it out, He's asking you to follow Him step by step. I think about the blind man who came to Jesus. He didn't know how Jesus would heal him. He didn't understand why he had been blind in the first place. But faith didn't wait for explanations. Faith moved in obedience. And in that moment, his life was transformed. Your questions may be big, but God's power is bigger. Trust him to turn your confusion into clarity and your pain into purpose. Faith doesn't deny the existence of questions, it elevates them. Instead of asking, why me, faith asks, God, how can you use this for your glory? Instead of asking, how will I get through this, faith declares, I know who is walking with me. When you shift your focus from the problem to the promise keeper, your perspective changes, and you begin to see your questions as opportunities for God to reveal his faithfulness. Some of the greatest testimonies come from the deepest questions. Joseph could have asked, why did my brothers betray me? Why did I end up in prison? But God was working behind the scenes, turning every betrayal, every setback into a setup for his purpose. When God's plan finally unfolded, Joseph's questions were answered with a testimony of God's provision and power. The beauty of faith is that it allows you to move forward even when you don't have all the details. Faith says, I don't need to see the whole staircase, I just need to take the next step. God is faithful to guide you, and every step you take in obedience brings you closer to the testimony he's writing in your life. Your questions may seem overwhelming, but they are no match for the God who holds the answers. When you let go of the need to understand and choose to trust, you open the door for God to do the miraculous. He's not limited by your understanding. He's limited only by your willingness to believe. Faith is the bridge that connects your questions to God's answers. It's the process that turns uncertainty into unshakable trust and doubt into declaration. Your testimony is being built in the middle of your questions. Every tear, every prayer, every step of faith is part of the story God is weaving. You may not see it now, but the day will come when you look back and realize that every unanswered question led you to a deeper trust in him. He is faithful, and he will not leave any part of your story unfinished. So release the weight of the questions you're carrying. You don't need to know how or why, because you already know who he is, the Alpha and the Omega, the author and finisher of your faith. Trust him to take your questions and turn them into a testimony that will glorify him and strengthen you. Faith doesn't need explanations, it only needs a Savior. Breakthrough always demands a step of faith that doesn't make sense in the natural. It's not about what you see, what you understand, or what feels secure. It's about trusting God enough to move when everything around you says, stay put. Like Peter stepping out of the boat onto the water, breakthrough begins when you choose faith over fear, courage over comfort, and trust over logic. Sometimes God's greatest miracles come when you're willing to move without all the answers. Peter didn't have a blueprint for walking on water. All he had was Jesus' word, come. That was enough. He didn't ask, what if I sink? Or what if this doesn't work? He simply obeyed. That's the kind of trust. God is calling you to a faith that steps out even when the path isn't clear. Blind steps aren't careless, they're courageous. They say, God, I don't know how this will turn out, but I trust you enough to take the first step. And let me tell you, every blind step you take in obedience positions you for a breakthrough that defies human understanding. It's in the moments when you can't see the outcome that God reveals his power. Breakthrough often requires stepping away from the familiar. The boat represents safety, predictability, and control. But miracles don't happen in the boat, they happen in the deep waters of trust. To experience what God has for you, you have to leave what's comfortable and step into what's unknown. It may feel risky, but faith always carries a divine reward. The reason blind steps are necessary is that they strip away your reliance on anything but God. When you can't see the way, you're forced to rely on his voice, his leading, his promises. That's where the miracle happens, not in your ability to figure it out, but in your willingness to trust him completely. Think about this. The water didn't become solid under Peter's feet until he stepped out. The breakthrough didn't happen while he was holding onto the boat. It happened when he let go. Sometimes your miracle is waiting on the other side of your fear. You're praying for God to move, but he's waiting for you to take the first step. Blind steps stretch your faith, but they also strengthen it. Every time you step out in trust, you're building a foundation for greater breakthroughs in the future. What seems impossible today will become a testimony tomorrow. Peter's step wasn't just about walking on water, it was about discovering a deeper level of trust in Jesus. The enemy will try to use doubt to keep you in the boat. He'll whisper, what if you fail? What if this isn't God? But faith silences doubt and declares, even if I don't see the outcome, I trust the one who called me. God is not asking for perfection, he's asking for obedience. And when you take that blind step, he meets you with his power, his grace, and his provision. Breakthrough doesn't come through comfort, it comes through courage. It requires you to step into the unknown, knowing that God's hand is already there to catch you. Trust him with the steps you can't see, and watch how he transforms your fear into faith and your steps into supernatural strength. Miracles aren't logical, they're birthed in a realm of trust, and they begin with a single step into the unknown. Trust is the bridge that connects you to your destiny. It's not about figuring out every detail or analyzing every step. It's about surrendering to the one who has already mapped out the plan for your life. When you trust God, you stop striving and start aligning. You begin to move in rhythm with his purpose, and that alignment positions you for blessings you could never achieve on your own. Destiny doesn't require you to have all the answers. It requires you to have faith. You may not see the full picture, but God does. He's not asking you to make sense of it. He's asking you to trust him with it. When you align your heart with his will, you step into a flow of grace that takes you further than your own efforts ever could. It's not about control, it's about connection. The process of alignment begins when you let go of your own plans and embrace God's purpose. Trust strips away the distractions of doubt and fear, allowing you to focus on what truly matters. It's not about doing more, it's about being in the right position. When your heart, mind, and spirit are in alignment with God, doors open, paths clear, and opportunities unfold that you didn't even know were possible. Think about Ruth, who aligned herself with Naomi and ultimately with God's plan. She didn't have all the answers, but her trust led her to Boaz's redemption and a place in the lineage of Jesus. Alignment with God's purpose doesn't just bless you, it impacts generations to come. Your trust isn't just about you, it's about the legacy God is building through you. Sometimes the greatest barrier to alignment is your own analysis. You're trying to figure out how it will all work out, but God is saying, just trust me. Analysis can lead to paralysis, but trust sets you in motion. When you stop trying to understand every detail and start aligning with God's higher purpose, you free yourself to walk in his power. Alignment doesn't mean the journey will always make sense. Joseph didn't understand why he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and imprisoned. But every step of his journey was aligning him with his destiny as a leader who would save nations. Trust doesn't eliminate the challenges, it gives you the strength to endure them, knowing they're part of a greater plan. The deepest blessings often require the deepest trust. When you align yourself with God's will, you're saying, I trust that your plans are better than mine. Even when I don't understand them, that alignment brings peace in the waiting, strength in the struggle, and joy in the journey. It positions you to receive the fullness of what God has for you. Alignment isn't just about what you do, it's about who you become. As you trust God, he shapes your character, renews your mind, and aligns your spirit with his. The process may feel uncomfortable at times, but it's producing something far greater than you can imagine. Trust transforms you from the inside out, preparing you for the destiny God has already designed. When you stop analyzing and start aligning, you move from striving to thriving. You let go of what you think should happen and embrace what God has already ordained. Trusting him doesn't mean you'll always understand the journey, but it does mean you'll walk in step with the one who holds your destiny. And in that alignment, you'll discover blessings that exceed your wildest dreams. Thanks for watching.